All right, I'm super excited to introduce you guys to our first panel. It's called We Almost Didn't Get Encryption. A lot of folks have been speaking in the past year about how we may be entering a kind of second crypto war that may have kicked off with some of the events over the past year. I think it's important to remember that there was a crypto war in the 90s, and we have some of the survivors of that war here, some true dyed-in-the-wool cypherpunks. I'm super excited to learn from them about what happened, what you guys got right, what went wrong in the 90s. ML is going to moderate the panel. Take it away. Thank you.
Testing. Thanks for the overview, Lane. We take encryption for granted in our everyday lives, and I think we're so lucky to be able to do that. And everyone sitting here is familiar with asymmetric key cryptography. We're familiar with public addresses and private keys. It's really shocking for something so mathematical to be so broadly, at least at a high level, understood. But I was shocked. I'm younger than most of these guys here, so I was shocked to learn that this form of math was deliberately, intentionally, proactively kept out of the hands of the public for so long. So today, I want to take a trip down memory lane and talk about how we got to now, how we got to be at this point where we won a few battles in the crypto wars. We're certainly not done. And two of the people on stage here were actively involved as part of the group that helped us win some of these battles, the Cypherpunks. I'll let them introduce themselves individually, and I did ask them to prepare a personal anecdote related to encryption. Ryan, you want to go first?
Hi, I'm Ryan Lackey. I was involved in the Cypherpunks from pretty much a couple months after it started in the early 1990s. I got involved in crypto because as a young kid, I had no power. I discovered cryptography where individuals have more power than everyone else in the world for all time put together, and it was really attractive to me. My interesting anecdote about this is I emailed, on the list there was a Usenet group called Cycrypt that had information where you could order from NSA all of their security documents, all the open source documents. So as like a 13-year-old kid, I called NSA on the telephone and ordered like 3 linear feet of the rainbow books of security guides from them, and then used that 10 years later to build an offshore data haven, anonymous electronic cash, all sorts of other crazy stuff.
I'm so not following that story. That's awesome. I'm Dean Tribble. I was relatively young at the time of Cypherpunk starting up, and have been working in computer security for quite some time, and then came back to blockchain to apply our how we do programming. But when I was living through that, this was, I started pre-internet, and privacy was normal. And so when these things are coming out and we're sort of hearing this technology, it's like, well, there's this awesome new stuff that Ralph, was involved in before he was allowed to talk about it, Ralph Merkle, right? And we're trying to deploy this, and what do you mean you have to do 40-bit encryption? I just don't even, why would you do that to yourself? And yet there were all these export regs, and it was a munition, and suddenly if you were trying to build into your business system the ability to send transactions, you couldn't. Or rather, you would end up using this stuff that you could break on a normal computer even at the time in a couple of days. And so there was a system that we had for doing distributed programming, and you couldn't use encryption, so we had, or you could only use 4-bit encryption, so we had the Daffy system, which you would be silly to use, that was produced in the US, and there was random people outside in Angola that they would take it and replace the encryption that we could not use, or the 40-bit crap, with real encryption that of course was available outside the US, but you couldn't have it here. And we just had all of these these crazy rounds of trying to navigate that stuff that I was tangled up in. So.
Hey, I'm David Campbell. Most people call me DC. I've been fortunate enough to found a handful of startup companies, all in the security and privacy domain. I was just a kid during the crypto wars of the 80s and 90s, so I looked on with curiosity, but mostly as a bystander. But I was pleased many years later to be a C-level executive at a web-scale infrastructure company where I had the opportunity to actually encrypt a small but meaningful part of the internet. This in response to the revelations of widespread dragnet surveillance being perpetrated by various government agencies. I believe that privacy is necessary for society to progress, but I also believe that we need to be thoughtful and pragmatic about the path we choose and the trade-offs we make as we build this next chapter of the internet.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sherri Davidoff. I'm the CEO of LMG Security, and I started off over 20 years ago on MIT's network security team, which was where I first started analyzing traffic, of course, to respond to different incidents. And my undergraduate project there was to analyze all of the university's network traffic. And I think when you do that on a day-to-day basis and you see just how easy it is to dip a toe into that stream of data, you then understand the importance of privacy, the importance of putting your emails in envelopes. And so when I started my company, LMG, in 2009, the 0th thing that I did, not the first thing, the 0th, because it was even before the company started, was to make sure that we had full end-to-end encryption in place automatically. No one could mess it up for all of our internal emails using PGP. And it took a while to piece it together, to get the right mail client, to make sure everybody had the right plugins. But I was sure over time that this would evolve, that it would get easier, and it hasn't. It's actually gotten harder. And to this day, we still have full end-to-end encryption in our email system. I don't know of any other company that does that, at least our size. But I think we need to work together to make it easier and to make it more accessible for our own security and for our national security and the security of our globe.
Thank you. That's great. So many amazing stories. Thank you all. So I think as our first topic of discussion, if we can rewind ourselves to the 1990s, maybe Dean, you can start off with kind of a short overview of what the cypherpunks were trying to achieve.
Sure. Yeah, as previous speaker said, privacy is about having the choice of what you disclose. And so much of cypherpunks, there were what I refer, Tim May was the shock jock of cypherpunk, where he was, he would rant about crypto anarchy or what have you. But most of it was, we have the technological ability to improve our world, to improve our privacy. And so the mantra of cypherpunks build code, well, you could build software, or you could, build a plan for political improvement in the scenario. But these cypherpunk meetings, people would get together and they would share what had they done, right? There's articles where, people would talk about anonymity, but as we see in Web3, often it's pseudonymity. And so I had, there was lots of the early discussions about reputation systems, because if someone's pseudonymous, you don't know who the true name is, like the Werner Vinge story. You don't know exactly who it is, but you can know it's the same person from last month that did you a solid, or that's been building a business over time. And so, from anonymity to pseudonymity and reputations and complex systems of how humans can cooperate, we can build systems so they can do that and stay private. And that was a big chunk of what we wanted to do in cypherpunks.
That's great. So when I think of cypherpunks, I think the well-known story is, they worked on cryptography. A lesser known, at least in other circles, is our remailer efforts. And I think Ryan over here has really interesting stories about that.
Sure. Yeah. So the interesting thing about the cypherpunks list is pretty much all the things that are getting built today were discussed on this mailing list in the 1990s in prototype form. There were a couple of enabling technologies that didn't exist at scale. Good quality handheld computers that were secure, that you could easily build software for, easy ability to write software. There were people like Microsoft that were gatekeeping writing software on the desktop at the time, and easy server platforms. All of those have been solved, so we're now seeing an explosion of stuff. Remailers are one of these things. Another one was the anonymous electronic cash, which we now have sort of in various ways coming. I mean, Bitcoin's anonymity is definitely an issue, and all the global ledger systems, but that was an enabling thing. But yes, remailers were one of the most interesting things that actually wasn't purely theoretical at the time. You could actually take software, run it on your computer, and store and forward messages in a way that was very, very difficult to trace. I ran a remailer on my server that was a PC running on my desk at MIT. I ran one offshore in the offshore data haven I built later, and I got requests from law enforcement around the world all the time for tracing messages, and I got to give them the best answer possible, which is, I don't have the ability to help you, not just I don't don't want to help you. And there was a case later, I did some defense contracting in Iraq, and one of the FBI guys who was on the same base as me knew one of the people that was calling me about the remailer I was still running, and we went out and we got a drink. It was a non-alcoholic drink on base, and I just told him, like, yeah, this is how it works, you don't get anything, and they stopped asking questions, which was really nice. So there's these systems, if you build them well and you build the technology correctly, you're not going to have to be brave yourself. I'd rather be brave up front about building the right software rather than being brave when there's a potential legal process facing me for how I operate something. And remailers definitely got that right. They were great because they had immediate value. They were difficult to build, but they were one of the early successes, and hopefully there's a lot more.
So thank you for that, because I worked with Eric Hughes on early remailer stuff, put one up, but I was a student at the time, so then I moved, and my bandwidth sucked, so I just couldn't, I wanted one to use and couldn't run my own for a while, so.
That's great. I actually have a piece of the Cypherpunks manifesto from 1993 in front of me. I'll just read the first piece so you give context. We, the Cypherpunks, are dedicated to building anonymous systems. We are defending our privacy with cryptography, with anonymous mail forwarding systems, with digital signatures, and with electronic money. So it's a shout out to all of you. All of you, you're still part of this. Okay, thanks so much for that. And so once encryption was out of the bag, right? The government then thought, okay, it's out, but then how do we insert a backdoor into that? Can we move forward from the early 90s to mid to understand what happened there with the Clipper chip, for example? If DC, you can take the lead.
Sure. So Clipper was an attempt that I believe was well-intentioned, but poorly executed. So the government, the NSA specifically, was observing that crypto was becoming ubiquitous, and the signals intelligence that they had been using for years and years was at risk of becoming ineffective. And so the idea was, well, with DES, they had artificially constrained the strength of the key. The DES encryption algorithm was originally designed by its designer with a 128-bit key. The NSA, as part of that approval process, said, no, we're going to have you ship this with a 56-bit key, which they could certainly crack in a reasonable amount of time. But things moved forward. AT&T was shipping a phone that was going to be strongly encrypted using public key encryption in strong algorithms. And NSA really wanted to get out in front of this. And thus was the Clipper project was started. And the idea here was key escrow. So we're going to have a strong algorithm that nobody can break, but the authorities are going to have a copy of the keys required to decrypt information that is approved by a court order to be surveilled. Now, the problem with this is multidimensional, but it feels to normals a lot like the government saying, okay, you can have locks on your doors, you can have privacy in your home, but you're going to be required to keep a copy of your key at the local sheriff's department. So this obviously didn't feel good. The Cypherpunks pushed back, the Big Brother Inside stickers proliferated, but it wasn't until a researcher by the name of Matt Blaze hammered on the Clipper implementation. He actually found a flaw not in the design, but in the implementation of the surveillance mechanism, the escrow mechanism, that allowed the checksum to be basically collided. And that blew up. Bill Clinton, having recently been elected, was supporting this because he thought it would help mitigate national security threats. But in the face of this sort of quick hack that Matt Blaze was able to put together, the widespread privacy concerns, the Big Brother dynamic of all of it was really unpalatable. So Clipper was shelved. Strong encryption became ubiquitous, and I think we have now seen the industry have to move. They can't just surveil all the traffic. They have to do detective work. You see this now with the Silk Road. You see it with the Alphabet guy. They literally sit there and watch. They profile their habits because they know they need to get that laptop logged in and open if they're going to have a case. Yeah. So
I think
that's Clipper in a nutshell.
In the case of the Clipper chip, it was a backdoor. And then when that failed, then they went on to try and weaken standards with DES and then AES. We don't have time to get into that today. But Sherri, maybe you can talk about, based on the work you do, weak encryption standards, backdoors. What can you tell us about that?
Well, when DC was talking, I was just thinking about the fact that what came out of this, it's not that the concept behind the Clipper chip went away. The Clipper chip itself died. But we unwittingly gave law enforcement and intelligence agencies incentive to do things like stockpile vulnerabilities and target the endpoints. You look at cases like the shadow brokers and leaking of vulnerabilities like Eternal Blue. They're keeping those to themselves so that they can get that backdoor access and target, and they're looking for things like keys. They want to steal keys. They want to target the endpoint. And yes, we've also seen some deliberate weakenings of the protocols themselves. But all of this impacts our security in so many ways. For example, I do a lot of work with healthcare, always have. I worked at the Children's Hospital Boston, and we all care about our medical privacy, right? And when HIPAA started to really get enforced around 2010, 2011, all of a sudden you started to see a huge uptake in encrypted email systems, right? And are these really, it drove me nuts, because my clients would say, oh man, I hate encrypted email, it's so hard to use. And I was like, that's not email. You're getting a link in an email, you're clicking on the email, you're going to a website, people are securing the website with a password like fluffy1 or something like that, and it's definitely not more secure, and it's definitely not email. It's a pain in the neck for everybody. And you could see, I started wondering, it's easy for me to use encrypted email on a day-to-day basis once you get it set up, but everyone kept saying, oh, it's so hard. It could have been easy, right guys? Microsoft could have chosen to put a button in the system that said, get public key, or just get it automatically, right? But those choices were not made. And there's a number of reasons to do it, maybe we can go into it more, but you can see that weakening of standards and the ineffective deployment of encryption throughout our society has really bitten us in private sector security as well.
That's great. We have about 4 minutes left, and I think it's a great time to tie that to today. You said Microsoft could have made it easy to click a button and have everything be end-to-end. We're seeing today's crypto wars, right? In 2001, very recently, when Apple wanted to scan iMessages and all the photos you have on iCloud, and then the UK is drafting an online safety bill, which basically requires any service provider to be able to provide in, I think, plain text, with the underlying messages, and they're saying it's for CSAM and other kind of law enforcement reasons. Can we talk about what you see as kind of today's wars? Let's situate these people back into the fact that we urgently need to stand up as individuals, as companies.
First, I'd like to hit a meta point on some of these things. In like the Clipper chip, or in, there were papers that talked about how key escrow as an architecture doesn't work. There were people in the government stepping up to say this system is secure, or we will protect your data, or what have you. And that's one of those things where that's one of the first red flags to look for, is where other people are claiming authority, they should be providing you real information, and they've got strong interests on another side, or they're going to create a database that they claim will be used according to one policy, but something happens and it's politically expedient to use it for something else. And then they will. And so we saw that then. We're seeing that sort of thing creep in now. It's exactly the give your master key to the sheriff's department. And so all of these systems, as we start heading there, could be a problem. In the case of Microsoft, because they actually acquired a company where we were doing encryption for businesses, trying to do as end-to-end as you could, but it's for businesses where that could create liability. And so what you wanted is to have more access inside the business in a reasonable fashion. It'd be interesting to talk about the details of that, but figuring out the use case is hard, right? Figuring out all the cases of, wait, you just signed something, but I didn't mean to sign that as a business, or we need to recover it and you're sick and I can't get your keys, or those kinds of things. There are some challenges in all the more interesting ways that we want to do encryption. But man, individual encryption, that ought to be easy, and it's not yet. So.
Thank you.
I think the biggest issue with getting crypto adopted has been user demand. Like back in the 90s, users didn't really care. They didn't know about that they should care, so they didn't care. They had lots of other things to worry about. And even today, computer systems are hard enough to use as an individual, as an organization, everything else, that security and privacy doesn't get prioritized. I think we owe a lot to our friends at NSA and other organizations, and what happened with the Snowden leaks, as well as all the other revelations of, yes, they are actually monitoring you. It's not a hypothetical thing. And as well as all the hackers, ransomware projects, everything else that are causing people to actually care about security now, there's a real market demand for it. That's going to fix the problems. It's just a question of whether this is going to be 2 years to fix it, 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. But I'm confident now that there's clear demand for this. It's going to get a lot better.
So we've got right now stronger encryption than we've ever had, but I think we're in a worse position for privacy than we've ever been. And so for all of you here that are building, I implore you to think hard about the data that you're storing. Don't collect it if you don't need it. Don't keep it for longer than you have to serve your users. And think about privacy as something important for the evolution of society. If we do this right, we can navigate Web3 in a way that will be pro-privacy. And we're just not heading in that direction right now. So we need your help.
Data is hazardous material. And of course, when it leaks, it can cause a lot of damage in many different ways. And I just wanted to encourage everyone who's building things to think about building in end-to-end encryption and allowing people to have their own control over their data, over their money, over anything else that you're storing. We've really, when Snowden, when the issues with Snowden came out, we saw an interest in privacy. All of a sudden, Google came out with an end-to-end encryption plugin, which I thought would be a huge advancement, and then it kind of quietly died. And it was exciting over the past year to see that re-emerge again. I think there's a lot of interest in privacy now. There's more awareness about the need for end-to-end encryption. So just something to keep in mind because it's a powerful tool and it can help protect all of us.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you all so much.